I'm Amy Morgan, the feature writer for the San Antonio Marriage Initiative. I am so happy today to introduce you to Arlene Pellicane, and you will see why I've used the word happy when you meet her. Arlene is a speaker, writer, mother, and wife who's created resources to help people have a happy home life. Among the titles of her 9 books, she's written 31 Days to a Happy Husband and 31 Days to Becoming a Happy Wife. She also writes about balancing technology and creating good digital habits, co-authoring a book for about children and their screens with Dr. Gary Chapman. Arlene has been featured on The Today Show, Wall Street Journal, Fox and Friends, Focus on the Family, and Family Life Today. She's the host of the Happy Home podcast and a regular contributor to Proverbs 31 Ministries. She lives in San Diego with her husband, James, and their 3 children. Arlene, thank you so much for being here.
So wonderful to be with you. Thanks for having me, Amy.
Oh, well, it's just great. When we talked the first time, you mentioned that you yourself grew up in a happy home. And that so struck me because I think so many people would not say that, but yet that is what we all long for.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of where you started, right? You wanted to bring that to everybody. And maybe that's not where you started, but that's where you can go. So let's talk about that a little.
For sure. It's like I saw in my own home, like, oh, I'm loved. This is a fun place. This is a joyful place. My mom and dad stayed married in love. And it's like, isn't this how everybody is? And then you realize, wait a minute, this is not how everybody is. I remember someone came to visit our home and my mom is very bubbly, very loud and like, hello. And if she doesn't know a stranger and my friend asked, is she always like this? And then I had to say, like, yeah, she's always like this. So that's my mom. My mom and dad came from Indonesia. I was born here in the United States. I am an only child. So my kids would say, Mom, you had a very boring life, not having any siblings. So they would think, how in the world did you have a happy life only being one of you? But that's all I knew. And I had cousins around the corner, which helped a lot. But I had a really, really great childhood.
And that is just so wonderful. And you started, writing and working in ministry in that. Talk about your journey. How did you get where you are now?
Yeah, I was that strange child that liked giving speeches. So when I gave a speech, I was like, wow, that was fun. Everyone else was petrified. And I said, this is fun. So I went to Biola University. I wanted to do something in communication, maybe missions based, maybe become a missionary, but I couldn't figure out what to do overseas. I thought, well, I don't want to be a nurse and I'm not good at language and I don't want to be a teacher. And so I just wasn't sure. And so I wanted to combine that, interviewing people with storytelling. So I thought to myself, well, maybe I want to be like the next Kathy Lee Gifford, And so I went to journalism school, being another million people. So I got my master's in journalism and I worked at the 700 Club doing feature stories. And I thought that was my sweet spot. I loved that. But I met my sweet husband, James, and we married and then we relocated, we moved. So the dream job lasted for about 6 months. And then I was in Dallas, Texas as a newlywed with my husband, James, and working at a temporary place answering the phone. So from glory to not being glory. But you know what? God is so good though, because I always had that interest, in speaking, writing, telling people stories. And so my next job was with Turning Point with Dr. David Jeremiah. And I worked with their television program, their radio program, writing for their devotional and their magazine. Really enjoyed that. And basically when I came home to be a stay-home mom, when I had my first child, he's 18 now, my husband, James, said, okay, well, you've talked about speaking and writing all this time. This is your chance. Why don't you try to write a book? Why don't you try to speak and see what happens? And so that is, if you've ever thought of the little engine that could, or like have a big dream, so that seems very impossible, like to be published. I remember telling my really good friend, dear godly friend, this dream, of being a published author, of going on Focus on the Family and doing these things. And she thought, good for you. But in her mind, she told me, I was thinking, Arlene, you can't do all those things. Like that's kind of a big ask. But here we are this many years later, and God's been it's all God, so gracious just to allow me to write what I'm interested in. So write about the marriage, write about parenting. And as we're in this age of technology, that's kind of become our banner that, hey, we can do more with less tech. So we've done that. And also trying to help marriages stay strong, not to be so kid-centered, but to also keep the marriage strong.
Well, that's kind of where you started, right, with your 31 days
Yeah.
to the happy husband.
Yeah.
And it started there. And I just love your brilliant idea of taking your interview skills and your journalism background. We're
Right.
kindred spirits because that's
Yes.
oh, that's right up my alley. And you interviewed some of the most interesting people to get their take.
Yeah, and, it's so fun because I can brag on my books because I can say, "This is not me. This is me taking all these smart people and kind of presenting it," So I talked with people like Dr. David Jeremiah. I mentioned that I worked for him, Bob Lepine from Family Life Today, Dr. David Clark, a psychologist, Tim Hawkins, the comedian, all these different people, Kevin Sorbo, the actor, asking them, "What makes your wife happy?" And listening to those responses, putting them in a really fun book that in 31 days, a wife could read a short chapter each day, have an action step, and kind of, sometimes we can't hear things from our own husband that we feel like, oh, yeah, we just kind of write it off. But if we hear it from someone else in someone else's voice, it resonates with us better. So I was trying to be that bridge to have these men, talk to us about what makes you happy and help that to translate into our own lives.
Well, and I like that. And you noticed, probably not quite surprisingly, but you noticed a common theme among the guys, didn't you?
I did.
Let's talk about that and how maybe we
Yeah.
can bridge that because it's important.
Yes, very much so. It's kind of no surprise that sex was at the top of the list. I had one of my husband's friends were like 31 days. Why do they need 31 days? They just need like food, sex, sleep, that's all they need. And they're very happy. But basically, we wanted the idea of like, how can you keep dreaming together? And there were 5 themes that kept coming up. And so conveniently, I shoved them in the acronym DREAM, but the D is domestic tranquility, that when he comes home, he needs to feel like this is a peaceful home. This is a home where I'm honored. This is a home where, I have a place. It's not like I'm a visitor in my home and my wife has taken over, or my kids have taken over. So domestic tranquility. The R is respect, that a man has to be respected. That is his lifeblood. The E is eros, that romantic love of, that feeling of I'm still wanted. The A of attraction. Are we still attracted to each other? That's what got us here in the first place into the marriage, was this amazing, crazy attraction. So how can we keep that attraction? It doesn't have to be the, smoldering attraction of when you first meet, but just keep being attractive to one another. And the M is mutual activities, that guys love to do things together. So different than how women are wired. Women can just sit face to face like this and talk with a cup of coffee and feel so happy. And the man, he wants to do stuff together. He wants to do stuff side by side. So figuring out how can we do these 5 things more with our husbands.
Well, and you really too, you don't just list them. You have,
Yeah.
a best of the best author kind of say their opinion,
Yeah.
but then you also give some action steps. I know you really took it upon yourself to do some mutual activities with your husband that maybe were a little outside of your comfort
Right.
zone.
That's for sure. We took a camping trip. My idea growing remember I told you I was the only child? My idea of camping was like stay at the lodge and look at a lake. That was my idea of camping. And my husband was like, put the backpack on your back, hike out there, sleep under the stars with a tent, so obviously 2 very different vacations. And when we were first married, here I'm thinking like, okay, we've got to do these activities together. But he says, let's go on this young marrieds church camping trip. And I think, okay, like intellectually, that seems like a good idea because my husband likes camping and we'll meet people. We're new to the church, we'll meet people. But my goodness, I didn't want to do that, to go camping. No, thank you. So the whole car ride up to the mountains, like 2 hours, I like, don't say a word. Is it too hot, too cold? I'm fine. Do you want to listen to the radio? I don't care. Are you hungry? Not really. So the whole time I was just like that. So my husband stops right in front of the campground, turns off the car, and he says, "Are you going to be like this the whole time? Because if you're going to be like this the whole time, we can just go home right now." And I was like, "What? You mean we could have gone home right now?" Like, I'm like, "What? This is
I don't
fantastic.
have to do it.
This is great." So we had this experience. And then I realized as a newlywed, like, okay, I'm being a baby. and I need to not be a baby, and I need to be like, okay, so I, I'm sorry, I have such a bad attitude, but I don't want to be here. And so a lot of times these mutual activities, they are stretching. They are too much, whether it's skiing or jujitsu or rollerblading. So some things I've been able to do and some things I've not been able to do, but I think the points come in trying.
Yes. Well, and even that goes back to the arrows, because like you said that you interviewed some best of the best men who said that's a really important part, and
Yeah.
even you noticed among you and your friends, and I think all of us have been there when you have young children. That's often not the first thing a young
Not
mom
at
is.
top of mind. That's right.
No, no, absolutely not. But yet, how important that was. And you had a suggestion, and again, like how you've taken
Yeah.
a recommendation and then you give just a practical step.
Yeah.
And you had a great practical step that any wife can do.
This was something I heard from Dr. Cliff and Joyce Penner, and they're the famous sex therapists. They wrote the book, The Gift of Sex, that I received on my wedding day, my husband was so happy. Good, you're talking to the Penners. This is gonna straighten you out. This is gonna be great. So I interviewed them, and the husband, Cliff, he had said, nothing turns on a man like a turned on woman. And that really resonated with my husband. And he was saying, like, you don't want to just show up. You want to like act like you are happy to be there. And, Sharon Janes, she has been talked to you before. And I remember she gave this story, and I thought it was so good of like, if your husband gave you flowers and was just like, here are the flowers, take them. They're for you. I know you like flowers, so I bought you some flowers. I thought of you, and they're on the table. You'd be like, you
No,
can
thank
take the
you.
flowers and you can go somewhere else. And the same idea, like when we're like, okay, I'm willing to have sex. And believe me, we feel this way. So please don't feel like I have conquered this. Like this is, something that you continually work on. But that flower analogy helped me to realize you have to like want to be there. You have to have that mindset. So something that's easy to help you stay in that mindset that the Penners suggested was the daily kiss. And again, confession time. Does this mean that I do the daily kiss every single day? No. And in fact, after doing this interview, I'll probably need to go into my husband and give him a kiss because we're talking about it. But the idea of keeping the pilot light lit between you. So that kiss that says, and it's like, a 5-second kiss, a 10-second kiss. People with teenagers will say, you need to gross out your teenager once in a while. That's how you know you're having a good marriage, that your teenager's like, ew, that's gross. So that's a positive badge of honor. But just that kiss that says, I'm still playful. I'm still interested. I still find you attractive. I want to be close to you. And the joke, of course, among especially moms is like, oh, well, I don't want to do that because he'll turn into an octopus. That all of a sudden it'll be like, think like, okay, she wants to go right now.
Yes,
So
yes,
you
yes.
might, it's like, no, no. So you might want to have a little chat with your husband, say, I want to be more affectionate. So from time to time, I'm just going to kiss you out of the blue just for the sake of kissing you. And of course, when you do that, when you are just kissing for the sake of kissing, then it will lead to more amorous activities later. So it just all kind of works together. So I think it's easy for us to become very businesslike, myself included, businesslike, kind friends, but not really romantic. And so we almost have to make it a goal. Like there were seasons where we literally would have a kissing chart on like if it had been kind of a dry spell, my husband would literally put a chart on the calendar on the refrigerator with X's. And every other day we were supposed to initiate the kiss, and we're supposed to put an X there if we had done it. I remember
Oh,
our kids were little, and one of Lucy had said, what is this chart? And I had no, like, in that reflex, I couldn't think of anything clever. And I just said, it's Daddy and I's kissing chart.
I love it. But you know what? She will probably remember that. And
She will
someday
remember the kissing chart. Yes.
when she grows up and she's a young wife, and she's
Yeah.
gonna it's amazing the things, I have two grown boys, and it's
Yeah.
amazing the things that do stick in their heads, and the things
Yes.
that will stick around, and that's a positive role model. That is. Well, now we got the husband's happy.
Yeah.
You moved on in the theme to becoming a happy wife, and I really like that you put the word becoming in there, because that illustrates that we have that
Yeah.
that ability to create our mindset, that we bring something to the table. It's not like we just wait around for somebody, the magic genie, to wave its
That's
wand,
right.
and then our life will be magical. That we have an obligation but an ability to become that person that we want to be. So tell us about that, because you did the same thing, right? You
Yeah.
interviewed some great ladies.
That's very well said, and what you how you described it, because I didn't want people when they say, "I'm not a happy wife," like, a lot of times it meant I'm waiting for my husband to, do XYZ, or I'm waiting for and it was always contingent on his behavior. Well, I would be happier if he were less blah, 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 fill in the blank. And this idea of, wait a minute, we do have the power to go where we focus, to think of where do we wanna focus and go there. We talked about the mutual activities. The first time we were on bikes together, I hadn't been on a bike for so long. I almost ran straight into a pole. And my husband was like, "Stop. What are you doing?" And I was staring at the pole to try to avoid it. And he said, "No, no, no. You stare at the path. And that's what will help you avoid those two poles." And so, this becoming a happy wife is trying to help the wife. Let's look at the right things, and let's start with fixing our attitude and our disposition before we go to fix our husbands. And so, for this one, I interviewed happy wives, people like Sharon Janes that I've talked about already, Liz Curtis Higgs, Dr. Marjorie Blanchard, wife of the 1 Minute Manager, Ken Blanchard. So, a bunch of just amazing women, Pam Farrell, my mentor, and asked them, like, how do you keep doing it? Like, regardless of how your husband is, of course, some days he's going to be amazing, Prince Charming. Other days, you're like, oh, it's like so boring, whatever. Like, how do you keep coming as a happy wife? And we use the acronym HAPPY, and it stands for H is hopeful, to put your hope in God, not hoping your marriage to make you happy, not hoping your husband, to save you, but your hope placed in God. And you are that happy wife as an act of worship to God. And of course, we're not talking in the context of abuse or something like that. So let's just take that this is a good guy that maybe you're just not getting along that great. So H, put your hope in God. The A is adaptable. Like, be adaptable. It doesn't always have to go your way. It can go his way as well, and be adaptable. The P is positive, focusing on what's going right instead of what's wrong. So many times the women get together. What do we do as wives? Oh, you wouldn't believe what my husband did. He put my wool sweater in the laundry and now it looks like, a Post-it. Oh, that's nothing. My husband, he burnt the roast, and my husband, he hasn't taken me on a vacation for 2 years, and it's like you get a badge of honor for griping about your husband. But if you came in and you were like, my husband's so great, he provides for our family, he doesn't even ever complain. The other women look at you like, well, aren't you special? That you have such an amazing husband. But what if we had this culture as wives of lifting up our husbands and truly looking for the things that they do, like showing up for work and not complaining, that maybe we don't ever notice because we always notice the negative things. So be more positive. And then the next P in happy is purposeful. And it's that idea of, don't just coast, like, okay, we got married. Great. Hope we make it. But just in the same way that you have a goal, maybe in your work, you have a sales quota you want to make, or a goal with your children. I want them to learn how to tie their shoes. I want them to learn how to cook a meal. You have these goals. Have goals in your marriage. I want us to have 4 getaways a year. I want to go to a marriage conference every 5 years. On our 10th anniversary, I want to go on a cruise, and kind of work together, but be purposeful. Dr. Marjorie Blanchard said it this way: what's new on your marriage resume? And I really like that. Like, every few years, what's new on my marriage resume? Is it always the same? Or, my husband, said it's almost like threatened, but he's like, the next time I get that community college flyer, we're going to take a dance class. And I'm like, okay, yes, we are. We're going to take a
Yeah.
dance class. So it's just always adding new things to your resume and being purposeful. So hopeful, be adaptable, be positive, be purposeful. And the last Y in happy is yielded, to just not always think it has to be my way, but that, we're equal, but we have different functions. And that husband, I'm going to honor you as the leader of our home. My son, Ethan, he was on this basketball team called the Magic. It was like a little league. They need Magic because they never won. But you'd hear like the coach would yell one thing, and then a parent would say the exact opposite. One is saying stop and one is saying run and one is saying pass and one is saying shoot, so it's
Yeah.
like very confusing. And so the same thing is in marriage. Like if you have two heads, one is redundant. And like we've talked about before, the head is, the neck, the husband might be the head
Right.
being that leader, but that woman is the neck. Believe me, you're a person of influence. So don't worry about that. And, Bob Lepine said it this way, if as a woman, you disagree with something your husband, and again, we're not talking about breaking the law or doing something completely ungodly, but just he wants to, go to this restaurant, you want to go to that restaurant. Obviously, it's a very small example, but you get it. That who's to say that your way is so much better than his way?
Yeah.
And when we just submit ourselves to God, like, okay, God, I'm going to trust you. I'm going to yield to this man. I'm going to yield to his judgment. God blesses that. I remember we were shopping. We live in San Diego. My little girl, Noelle, when she was in fourth grade-ish, she wanted to get boots. It was in winter, but you don't really need boots in San Diego. And we saw these boots, and I say to my husband, "Oh, Noelle wants these boots. Can we buy them?" And my husband's like, "No, we live in San Diego. We don't need boots." And I was literally writing this in The Happy Wife of Being Yielded, to your husband. In my mind, I was thinking, oh, please, they're $20. Buy the boots. But I'm thinking, oh no, I'm an example to my daughter. And I just wrote this chapter about yielded. Okay. No, well, sorry, we're not getting the boots. Fine. And she was, oh, disappointed. The next week, we got this big bag of stuff from my cousin of clothes. And guess what was in it? A pair of boots, my daughter's size, nicer than we would have bought. And it was like God telling me, if you will honor your husband, then I will honor you. And this is how it works. And my husband later said to me, you know why I didn't buy those boots? I was like, why? It's like, well, I'm in real estate, I'm in sales, and I'm not selling houses this month. So if I'm not selling a house, why am I buying my daughter boots in San Diego? And this makes perfect sense. And you realize, oh, you really do know what you're doing, don't you?
You
So
really were thinking. You
this
weren't just
idea,
trying
yes.
to be
Yeah.
rude and mean and not get the boots.
Yeah. So for us as wives, a lot of times that's a sticking point that we feel like, well, who's he to say? And I know better. And I know better about this. But to be yielded, even in parenting, even in parenting.
Well, one area where both you and your husband are very much on the same page, but it's very different in this cultural world
Yeah.
is your kind of your dearth, I would almost say, of technology. In fact,
Yeah.
even though you worked in TV, you didn't have a TV at all the first, I don't know what, 6 months you were married?
Yes. So when we were newlyweds, my husband was like, can we not have a TV so that we can talk more and do those mutual activities, get more of that eros, do all that stuff. And I was like, well, I guess we're newlyweds. Okay. But I thought this is weird. But then guess what? I got used to it. And then we go to other people's houses and the TV was on in the background. And we'd be like, it's so noisy in the house. Like, how do they stand that? And so we just kept that, not having a TV in the house. So we do have a lot of technology. Like you see us now, we have computers, we have phones, we podcast, we do things. So we get that. But what we don't do is we decided before the kids were, when they're itty bitty, like no video games, no social media, no personal devices, because that's where we saw the kids just get lost. And so the kids really have grown up. I've got a college aged boy who got his first phones the summer before his college year as being a freshman. I have a junior daughter and an eighth grade daughter, and neither of them have phones. We have a family Gab phone, which is a great dumb phone. It's not a smartphone. It's just a family phone that does calls and texts. So if they're going somewhere, I'll just say, grab the family phone, and they can grab that phone and tell us, when to come pick them up. But they've grown very accustomed. A lot of times they'll forget that because we're so used to not having one. And they just use their friend's phone to tell us, come pick us up. It's not a big deal. So that is something very strange about us, but it's been awesome. And we really encourage people. Our girls go to public school. We live in San Diego. They're involved in sports. They're involved in clubs. They have real friends. So those arguments of like, well, they can't have real friends if they don't have social media. It's almost the inverse. Like you have time to have real friends because you're not just posting all your highlights and trying to compete with one another on social media.
Well, and two, I mean, it applies to the family and
Yeah.
the children with your book with Gary Chapman. What was the name of that one?
That
Just
one is called Screen Kids. There's a Screen Kids and also a companion book, Grandparenting Screen Kids. Just how do you deal with technology in your house and have a plan for it? How do you know what's happening in the kids' brains? Are your kids attaching to you instead of their devices? And that's co-authored with Dr. Gary Chapman.
yeah, that I think that's so helpful. But then too, again, how that applies to marriage.
Yeah.
You know, without having all those arguments. I
Right.
mean, I remember there was a time, my boys are grown now, so I have, they do their thing. But I remember I was going to take that Xbox and I truly threatened to throw it out of the window.
Right.
And they are good kids. They had great grades and they played, sports and did all that. But
Yeah.
just still the amount of time that they could spend
Yes.
on that was just infuriating.
Yeah, there's a lot of peace, you're right, because all that fighting in between and then defending one parent defending a child, the other parent not defending the child, it does really help to be on that same page of, this is what we think is possible and let's go for it.
Yeah. And then too, any of that stress and even just the disrespect between the husband and wife. You
Yeah.
said, I love it. My husband's more interesting than my phone.
Yes.
How easy is it to just pick up your technology and just
Mm.
check out?
Yeah, think of bedtime. That used to be, snuggly time or talk time or, kiss time, whatever. But, what is that? A lot of times we could be back to back with our phones or one person watching YouTube and one person watching something else just in their own zones and then just turning off the device and then falling asleep. And you think, wait a minute, this is not the calming rhythm of life that we want, nor the connection. It's not a nice way to wake up or to go to sleep. And so to have maybe a device-free zone when you wake up and when you go to sleep. And you have to remind yourself, my spouse is more interesting than my phone. The phone changes. So you think like, well, there's a lot of interesting stuff on there. And my
Yeah.
husband, my wife, they've been the same for the last 50 years. But to continually remind yourself that this person has depths of their soul and of their being and of interest, and obviously that interests me. That's why I'm attracted to you in the first place. We got to rediscover those things, and that it's more important for me to show interest in you than it is, my social media, news, email. That it doesn't care if I'm interested in it. But your spouse cares if you show interest. The dividends that you will reap from just showing interest in your spouse, I mean, that's so much more, has so much more worth than paying attention to your phone.
Who do you think is more resistant as you found and were doing your research? Is it the husband that's more resistant to giving up technology, or is it the wife, or is it just equal but different?
I think it's equal but different. I think the man does many times it's the woman that sees the problem. I will give you that. Many times it's the mom or the wife that's like, "Do you not see how much stuff we're doing? Like how much we're playing way too many video games or we're doing too much or I'm concerned." And many times it's the husband that will be like, this is normal. It kind of keeps the kids out of my hair. It's fun to play video games with my boys. It's okay, chill out." So that is probably more normal, but I think that many times for men, once they catch that vision of like the things they can do with their son, whether it's football or fishing or whatever, and then the importance of being there for their daughter so that she doesn't have that, void in her life of having a strong relationship with her father. Once that dad gets that husband gets that, I think they can get on board. And the woman, of course, we are too attached to it. They were always answering someone's text, or we're always like looking on social media, we're looking up a recipe, or we're looking up this. We're always like looking up things to help us in our mothering life.
Yeah.
And so we can be guilty of it as well and need those same parameters.
Yeah. And catching up and just even
Yeah.
as social media and how people were inside and spending more and more time on that. I mean, so much, mental health has
Mhm.
just declined. It's been so destructive and
Yeah.
detrimental. I mean,
Yeah.
the teens really seem to have suffered, but I think
Very
that
much.
no one's immune.
Yeah. And it really comes to those core decisions of finding, even if it's as basic as my husband is more interesting, my kids are more interesting, all this technology, I will put it aside, and really having the common courtesy that when you're in the same room together, that you're looking at each other, and then obviously you can go on and, you got to do your homework, you got to do your work. We get that. But mealtime, you're looking at each other. There's no screens present. That at some glimmer of the day, whether it's a car ride that you're taking advantage of, talking to each other, or maybe you're listening to a book or a podcast together and then talking about that. Just take advantage of those moments and make sure you're really connecting to each of your family members without a device.
Well, I think I'm feeling a little convicted. I was just on a car ride with my husband and we were We were more involved, at least I was more involved with my device than I should have been because
Yes.
he was driving. So that's definitely they could listen to a
And
podcast.
we are all guilty of that,
Yeah.
including myself. And there are moments to catch up. So I'm not saying like you can do that, but just be very aware of it. Like almost watch yourself. Like, okay, I'm on my phone right now. I need to be like a hot potato. Like I need to just get this text out and then I need to put it down and then talk to this person in the car with me. Be aware of what you're doing.
Well, and I think that's a really good reminder that one of the other things you could be doing is listening to one of your books on audiobooks or
Yes.
finding that podcast that
Yeah.
has, marriage champions that is going to build in and give you something to talk about.
And it,
And
it puts you on the same page, like we're talking about. It really is helpful.
yeah, I think that's a really great challenge. And with all your different 31-day challenges and just a really good another one to remind us. So thank you, Arlene. It's just so great to talk with you. You're so much fun.
Thank you, Amy. It's been great. Thanks so much.
Marriage Champions. If you'd like to connect more with Arlene and her resources, you can always find us at samarriage.org.